Hello and welcome to A Spirited Debate. I'm Lauren Green. The Supreme Court's landmark decision last week on same-sex marriage has many religious groups worried. Although officially churches that say marriage is only between a man and a woman will not be required to perform same-sex ceremonies, there's concern they will be challenged in court by gay activists, and also that religious schools and organizations will be stripped of federal funding or tax-exempt status if they don't comply. Here to debate the issue of how same-sex marriage will change society is Jonathan Rauch, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and author of Denial, My 25 Years Without a Soul, and Paul Edwards, editor of the Deseret News. Welcome to you both.
Great to be with you, Lauren.
Well, Jonathan, let me start with you, Jonathan, because one of the main fears is that churches will be pressured to perform same-sex marriages. Do you see that happening?
Zero chance of that, Lauren. The First Amendment clearly forbids that.
Okay. Paul, what do you think?
Well, I think Jonathan's exactly right. I think the First Amendment prevents that kind of action. I think the real question becomes more auxiliary institutions associated with churches. So things like church institutions, schools, those kinds of organizations. Will they be involved in being required to accommodate same-sex ceremonies, for example?
You know, I mean, Jonathan, I want you to expand on that a little bit, because already we see sort of this movement among more liberal churches that they will perform same-sex marriages, and that there is a sort of cultural divide that might pressure their church into performing same-sex marriages. And we see polls all the time that, that people are moving towards this idea that, that same-sex marriage is okay and the church should perform them. So do you see that people will use that kind of pressure, not legal, but just sort of cultural pressure to have churches perform same-sex marriages?
Well, the culture is clearly changing, and I think we are going to see an increasing number of churches and synagogues and religious denominations that embrace same-sex marriage and same-sex loving relationships. But I agree with Paul. The big question is, what will the law allow and provide for? And that, I think, is where the issue is really going to get engaged, I think, in the next few years.
So, but will schools and religious organizations, will they lose their tax benefits or federal dollars if they don't comply? I mean, this is one of the fears, that they will lose some kind of tax-exempt status as people put pressure on them to perform same-sex marriages. We've already seen that happening with the Freedom from Religious Foundation, as they've put pressure on the churches or the government to have churches lose their tax-exempt status if they preach politics from the pulpit. Jonathan? I mean, sorry, Paul, why don't you go ahead first?
Lauren, I do think that this is a very important question. We had a big change last week, and we're now just getting accommodated to what it means to have same-sex marriage throughout the country. In the state of Utah, we had to deal with this about 18 months ago when a federal court declared that same-sex marriage would be the law in the state of Utah. And so we the state legislature worked actively with religious leaders, with leaders from the LGBT activist community, to identify where the points of conflict were and where there could be possible win-win opportunities. And since we've been dealing with court decisions more than legislation, we now really need to move into the legislative realm, where this can be brokered, discussed, negotiated, and worked through in reasonable ways so that people of faith get what they need to protect their religious rights and practice, and that the LGBT community can also be able to be afforded protections in employment, in housing, and in different kinds of accommodations.
And Jonathan, you say what?
Well, I completely agree with Paul, and I think actually we have an opportunity to do this. The question isn't whether there will be conflicts between discrimination law and First Amendment law, but whether we can work these out through the legislature. And in fact, there are bills in Congress right now that would take, for example, the tax exemption denial off the table for religious organizations, and in principle it would be very easy to simply tie that to another bill in Congress which grants federal anti-discrimination protections to gay people. You see the trade here. Gay people get protection from discrimination and religious people get accommodations. That's what Utah did, and that's a model of the kind of conversation that we could now have.
Do you see, though, a conflict, though, arising because you've got pastors and priests and even the Pope who tell their flocks that the same-sex marriage is inconsistent with their faith, and you've got a public policy that says same-sex marriage is legal. What we've got here is a situation where religion and government have now are in conflict over what's moral and what's not. So, Jonathan, how do you, beyond the legal issue of it, how do you resolve this conflict?
Well, I think it's a legal question. I'm not sure I see a much beyond that. The society is changing, and we'll have that debate, and that's something that every religion will do in different ways. But I think what we're talking about from the point of view of real conflict is a conflict between the 14th Amendment and the First Amendment, anti-discrimination and freedom of speech. And that's, I think, what the courts and the law are really going to have to work out. That's where the hard work is, because that's where the rubber hits the road about what you're allowed to do.
Yeah, and what kind of conflict? Maybe I foresee a conflict because in one sense they said, you know, this is not right, the religious people, and then you've got a public school, church, saying this is right. This is in conflict we're headed for. Well,
undoubtedly, again, there is the cultural conflict that is now being expressed in legal decisions. Places like what is the proper employment standard for a church-run hospital would be an example of where we may see different kinds of conflict over the rights of LGBT and a religious organization that's interested in preserving certain kinds of standards. And there again, Lauren, I think that what we've seen is that in many states, and places like Utah are a good example of this, where people of good faith, both from the faith community and from the activist community, are getting together, getting to know each other, work together, they're actually finding win-win opportunities to protect what is most important to both sides.
Well, that would be the best scenario, to have win-win scenarios for everybody.
And Utah has really paved a way to show that that's possible.
All righty, as we move forward, we'll see. Thank you very much, Jonathan and Paul, for being here.
Thank you, Lauren.
And you want to check out foxnews.com for more on this developing story. I'm Lauren Green, and thanks for watching.